Was I wrong for what I did? Honestly, I've replayed that day in court 1,000 times, and every single time I come to the same conclusion. No, I wasn't. But my family, oh, they certainly thought so. They thought I was the devil reincarnated, a traitor to our name, all because I wouldn't just hand over everything I'd earned, everything I'd fought for, to them on a silver platter. They came at me with lawyers, with threats, with tears, demanding I give up my inheritance, my home, my future. They expected me to crumble, to yield. What they didn't expect was for military police to storm into the courtroom the moment I handed a file to the judge. Tell me, would you have done the same? Let me take you back to where this all began, to a time when my family still pretended to love me, before the claws came out and the greed consumed them. I grew up in a small town, the eldest of 3. My parents were decent, hard-working people, but my father, bless his soul, always had a soft spot for my younger siblings, Sarah and Mark. They were the babies, the ones who could do no wrong, while I was the responsible one, expected to set an example, to always be strong, to never ask for anything. It was a role I accepted, a burden I carried, because that's what families do, right? You support each other. You make sacrifices. My father was a retired Marine. He'd served 2 tours, came back with a Purple Heart and a quiet dignity that commanded respect. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, you listened. He taught me discipline, integrity, and the importance of looking out for my own. He also taught me how to fix a leaky faucet, change a tire, and stand up for myself, lessons that would become invaluable later on. My mother, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of emotions, a force of nature who loved her children fiercely, but perhaps not always equally. Sarah, with her delicate beauty and artistic leanings, was her favorite. Mark, with his charming rogue attitude, was a close second. I was me. I worked hard in school, knowing that if I wanted anything in life, I'd have to earn it. My siblings, not so much. Sarah dabbled in art, never quite finishing anything, always waiting for inspiration to strike, or for someone else to pay her way. Mark bounced from one Getrich, quick scheme to another, usually ending up deeper in debt than when he started. My parents, despite their struggles, always bailed them out. They're still finding themselves. My mother would say, they just need a little more time, a little more help. I never got that help. I got lectures on responsibility and self-reliance, and I got resentful, though I tried to bury it deep. When I turned 18, I did what my father had always secretly hoped I would do. I joined the military. Not the Marines, though. I opted for the Air Force, specifically intelligence. I wanted to see the world, learn a skill, and build a life for myself, far away from the subtle favoritism and constant demands of my family. My father was proud, beaming even, though he never said it outright. My mother cried, of course, but it felt more performative than genuine, a show for the neighbors. Sarah and Mark barely registered my departure. They were too busy with their own dramas, their own needs. My years in the Air Force were transformative. I excelled in my role, rose through the ranks, and saw things, learned things, that most people only read about in books. I deployed multiple times, faced real danger, and forged bonds with my fellow airmen that were stronger than any I had with my blood relatives. I invested my money wisely, lived frugally, and by the time I retired after 20 years, I had a comfortable nest egg, a good pension, and a small but beautiful home that I owned outright. I had achieved everything I had ever dreamed of, solely through my own efforts. Then the phone call came. My father had passed away suddenly from a heart attack. It was a shock, a blow that rattled me to my core. Despite our complex relationship, I loved him deeply, and his passing left a gaping hole in my life. I flew back home for the funeral, bracing myself for the emotional turmoil, but what I found was something far more insidious. My mother, Sarah, and Mark were not just grieving, they were already talking about the will. It turns out my father, in his quiet, unassuming way, had left a substantial inheritance. Not just money, but also the family home, which had been in our family for generations, and a few other valuable assets. He had always been meticulous, and his will was clear, concise, and professionally drawn. He had divided everything equally amongst the three of us, with one crucial stipulation. I was to receive the family home, free and clear, as a token of his appreciation for my service and my unwavering sense of responsibility. The remaining assets were to be split 3 ways. You'd think this would be fair, right? A man's last wishes, honored and respected, not in my family, not even close. The moment the lawyer read the will, the air in the room turned toxic. My mother burst into tears, not of sorrow, but of outrage. How could he do this? She wailed. He loved Sarah and Mark more. This is an insult. Sarah started hyperventilating, claiming I was stealing her childhood home. Mark, ever the opportunist, just stared at me with a calculating glint in his eyes. They launched into a tirade, a relentless assault of accusations and emotional blackmail. You were never here, Sarah shrieked. You abandoned us for the military. You don't deserve this house. My mother chimed in, we need this money more than you do. You have your fancy pension. Sarah needs to fund her art. Mark needs to pay off his debts. I tried to reason with them, to explain that this was Dad's wish, that I had my own life, my own responsibilities. But they weren't listening. They had already decided I was the enemy, the greedy one, the one who had taken what was rightfully theirs. The next few months were a living hell. They bombarded me with calls, texts, and emails, each one more hateful than the last. They showed up at my new house, uninvited, demanding I sign over the deed to the family home, demanding I give them a larger share of the inheritance. When I refused, they escalated. They started spreading rumors about me in our small town, painting me as a cold, heartless opportunist who had taken advantage of my father's dying wishes. My former friends, swayed by their narrative, started to distance themselves. I felt isolated, betrayed, and utterly alone. It wasn't just the house they wanted. They wanted everything asterisk. They wanted my father's military medals, his old uniform, even his vintage fishing rod, items that held deep sentimental value for me. They claimed they were family heirlooms, and that I, as the selfish one, didn't deserve them. It became clear that this wasn't about need. It was about control, about punishing me for daring to live my own life, for daring to be successful without their constant interference. Finally, they served me with legal papers. They were suing me. They claimed undue influence, alleging that I had somehow manipulated my dying father into leaving me the house. It was a ludicrous accusation, an insult to my father's memory, and a direct assault on my character. They wanted the entire will overturned, the estate divided equally, and the house sold, with the proceeds split among them. They wanted to destroy me, to leave me with nothing, just to satisfy their insatiable greed and misplaced sense of entitlement. I hired a lawyer, a kind but no-nonsense woman named M.S. Davies. She listened patiently to my story, her expression grim. This is a common tactic, she explained. They're hoping you'll cave under the pressure, that you'll just give them what they want to avoid a lengthy and costly legal battle. But I wasn't going to cave. Not this time. My father had trusted me, and I wasn't going to let his final wishes be trampled on by my manipulative family. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. I had fought for my country, I had built my life from the ground up, and now my own family was trying to dismantle it, piece by piece. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have given in? Would you have fought back? What would your strategy have been against such a relentless and emotionally abusive family? The day of the court hearing arrived, heavy with a sense of dread and anticipation. The courtroom was packed. My mother, Sarah, and Mark sat on the opposing side, their faces a mask of righteous indignation. Their lawyer, a slick, smarmy man, kept shooting me condescending glances. I sat beside a mess, Davies, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. I had spent weeks preparing, gathering evidence, and steeling myself for the confrontation. The hearing began with their lawyer presenting their case, painting me as a villain who had isolated my father and exploited his fragile state. My mother sobbed dramatically on cue, Sarah dabbed at her dry eyes, and Mark looked suitably aggrieved. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar, and for a moment I felt a flicker of doubt. Had I misjudged them? Was I really the monster they claimed I was? But then I remembered all the years of neglect, the demands, the casual cruelty, and my resolve hardened. When it was my turn, MS, Davies calmly presented our case, detailing my father's sound mental state, the clear wording of his will, and the lack of any evidence of undue influence. She called me to the stand, and I recounted my relationship with my father, my service, and the genuine love and respect we shared. I spoke about his values, his integrity, and how he always believed in earning your way. Then came the cross-examination. Their lawyer, Mr. Thompson, began his attack, trying to trip me up, to make me out to be a liar. Isn't it true? He sneered that you barely visited your father in his final years, that you were too busy with your own life, your own selfish pursuits, to care for him. Objection, MS. Davies interjected, argumentative, sustained. The judge said, his gaze fixed on Mr. Thompson. He tried a different tack. You claim your father was of sound mind, yet he left you the most valuable asset in the estate, bypassing his other two children who were always there for him. Doesn't that strike you as unusual? Even suspicious? My father valued responsibility and self-reliance. I said, my voice steady, he believed in rewarding hard work. He also knew that I would honor his legacy, unlike others. A gasp rippled through the courtroom from my family's side. My mother glared at me, her eyes spitting fire. Sarah mumbled something under her breath. Mark just stared, a flicker of something that looked like fear in his eyes. Mr. Thompson pressed on, his voice dripping with condescension. So, you believe you are more deserving than your own siblings, more deserving than your own mother, who cared for your father daily. I believe my father made his wishes clear, I replied, and I am simply asking that those wishes be respected. The questioning continued for what felt like an eternity. He tried to discredit my character, to portray me as unfeeling, manipulative, and greedy, but I stood my ground, answering truthfully and calmly, refusing to be provoked. Finally, it was time for closing arguments, MS. Davies eloquently summarized our position, reiterating the validity of the will and the malicious nature of their claims. Then Mr. Thompson launched into his final, impassioned plea, playing on emotions of the judge, emphasizing the heartbreak of my mother and siblings and the injustice of my father's will. He finished with a flourish, demanding the court overturn the will and redistribute the assets. The judge, a stern but fair woman, listened intently. She thanked both lawyers and then looked directly at me. Do you have anything further to add, MS? My last name, she asked. I took a deep breath. I knew this was my moment. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single, thin manila file. Your Honor, I said, my voice resonating through the hushed courtroom, I do. I have one final piece of evidence that I believe is highly relevant to this case. I walked slowly towards the judge's bench, the eyes of everyone in the room fixed on me. My family looked confused, then annoyed. Mr. Thompson looked smug, as if he knew whatever I couldn't possibly counter his brilliant closing argument. I handed the file to the bailiff, who then passed it to the judge. She opened it, her brow furrowing slightly as she began to read. The courtroom was silent, save for the rustle of papers. As she read, her eyes widened, and a look of stunned disbelief spread across her face. Just as her eyes reached the bottom of the first page, the double doors of the courtroom burst open with a loud bang. Everyone jumped. 6 uniformed military police officers, their faces grim and determined, stormed into the room. Their presence was jarring, utterly unexpected, and utterly terrifying. My family gasped. My mother shrieked. Mr. Thompson's face went white. Judge, however, remained calm, though her expression was still one of shock. She looked from the file in her hand to the military police, then back to the file. Your Honor, the lead MP stated, his voice clear and authoritative, we are here to apprehend my mother's name, Sarah's name, and Mark's name on charges of grand larceny, fraud, and impersonation, in connection with the fraudulent receipt of military benefits. A stunned silence descended upon the courtroom. My family looked utterly bewildered, then enraged, then terrified. The judge slowly closed the file and looked at my family with a steely gaze. Based on the evidence presented in this file, which clearly outlines a decade-long scheme to fraudulently collect survivor benefits from the Department of Veterans Affairs, falsely claiming the deceased Mr. My father's last name had not remarried, and that his children were still dependents, I find the accusations against MS. My last name regarding undue influence to be entirely without merit. Furthermore, I will be forwarding this file, along with a recommendation for a full federal investigation, to the appropriate authorities. This court is adjourned. My family erupted into shouts, protests, and denials, but it was too late. The military police moved swiftly, taking my mother, Sarah, and Mark into custody right there in the courtroom. Their faces were a mixture of shock, fury, and utter defeat as they were led away in handcuffs. Mr. Thompson, sputtering and sweating, tried to intervene, but he was quickly dismissed. The file I had handed to the judge contained irrefutable proof, painstakingly gathered over years, that my family had been systematically defrauding the VA for over a decade. My father, being a meticulous man, had kept records. When he remarried briefly, years after my mother, he had meticulously documented the change in his marital status, as required by the VA. He had also documented the fact that his children were no longer dependents once they reached adulthood and were financially independent. My family, however, had continued to collect his survivor benefits, forging signatures and submitting false documents. They had even gone so far as to create a fake identity for me, claiming I was still a minor dependent living at home to justify their fraudulent claims. They had been stealing from the government, from the very system that supported veterans and their families, all while trying to steal from me. The aftermath was a whirlwind. My family was arrested, charged, and eventually convicted of multiple felonies. They faced hefty fines, restitution, and even jail time. The inheritance, as per my father's original will, remained mine. The family home, the place where I had grown up, was finally and truly mine. The town, which had initially shunned me, quickly changed its tune once the truth came out. There were apologies, awkward glances, and a newfound respect. But I didn't care about that. I cared about clearing my father's name, about honoring his wishes, and about finally being free from the toxic grip of my family. I learned a lot from that experience. I learned that blood doesn't always mean family, and that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who will hurt you the deepest. I learned that standing up for yourself, even when it's terrifying, is always the right thing to do, and I learned that justice sometimes arrives with a thunderous knock and a squad of military police. So, was I wrong? I still say no. I protected my father's legacy, I defended myself, and I exposed a massive fraud. What would you have done differently, like this video, if you were on my side? Subscribe for more stories like this, and share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I'll see you all in the next story.